Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Turn the Page, the official podcast of Syosset Public Library. I'm Jenn, your co-host today, and I'm here with the author of a really exciting and engaging new debut thriller. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yes, my name is Iris Yamashita, and I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me here. This is my debut novel, City Under One Roof, but I did come from the screenwriting world. So I had written a screenplay called Letters from Iwo Jima, which was directed by Clint Eastwood, and that did get a number of Academy nominations, including Best Original Screenplay. So I have had some experience writing before, but this is definitely my first go at writing a book.
Yeah, I loved this book, and I also love that movie. It's really fantastic. And in addition to, all the things you've just talked about, like you've done so many other interesting things, like you've studied engineering at the University of California, and you've studied virtual reality in Tokyo. And as you said, you've written films for Clint Eastwood. And, you say on your website that fiction has always been your passion. And I'm wondering how all of these experiences have, shaped your journey toward this book.
Well, I've always loved writing. It was always a passion. It was always a hobby, and I was always taking classes. But I had Asian parents, so so I had to not make that a career in the beginning. It had to be, in their eyes, something more practical, which was engineering. And I went all the way to get a master's and in mechanical engineering, and I think I must have just been smarter back then because I don't remember anything about engineering. I can barely calculate the tip. So, I don't know if engineering plays a part in writing, but maybe it did help me develop sort of this problem solving ethic, like when you stumble into a problem when you're writing and you just think of it kind of logically, and how do you solve this problem? Maybe, I might be stretching, but that's what I'm going to say.
That does make sense to me, and it kind of links to something else I think you mentioned in an interview I read, which is that writing starts with a question that needs answering, and like engineering does too, I guess, in a way, and I think that's such an interesting approach to writing. So I'm wondering, like, what was your question with this book? What led you, what was your galvanizing question for City Under One Roof?
Yeah, I always tell my students it's good to start with a question, and it's always good to start with a dead body. So maybe even though I hadn't written a murder mystery before, that was probably a natural thing in my mind of what makes something interesting. The question for me is that I needed to answer was, what kind of people would choose to live in a very remote town that you can only get through a tunnel, a narrow one-way tunnel, and where everyone lives in a single high-rise building? Just what why would you live there? And so in my fictional town, everyone has some kind of secret, or they're, running away from something or someone. And the protagonist as well has a secret. So that's sort of the premise, the questions that need answering.
I love that. Yeah. And there are so many great questions at the heart of this book, and so many secrets, as you've just said. I'm wondering, when you write a mystery, oftentimes, like, the protagonist, the person solving the mystery, is often kind of holding their own secrets as they are trying to investigate the secrets of others. So I'm wondering kind of if you could talk a little bit maybe about where your protagonist came from, how you kind of shaped her, and how her perspective informs the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I had this great setting, of this town that feels very claustrophobic because, as I said, it's all in one building, and it's when there's an avalanche that closes the tunnel, then you're really stuck there. And for my main character, my protagonist, I wanted to make her feel very claustrophobic. So there's a lot of tunnels, there's the building, there's tunnels that go underground, there's tunnels to get from one place to another. And I just thought, oh, I wanted to give her that sort of claustrophobia feel, and something traumatic that would have heightened her feeling of claustrophobia, and the idea that you might die, that was very interesting to me. And so yeah, the setting helped inform me on how to write the character.
Ooh, that's great. Yeah, because the setting is so interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about it? Because from what I understand, it's based on a real place, but you have taken some liberty. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the seed of the idea came over 20 years ago, when I had seen a documentary about the real city, the real inspiration, Whittier, Alaska. Just the idea that everyone lives in one building, and that it's this very chilly place, of course, with 150 miles per hour winds, and the temperatures can dip below 35 below. And just that chilly feeling really informed the idea of a cool place. And so it was there in the back of my mind, but I didn't have an actual story to go with the setting until much, much, much later, when I was thinking of an idea of, what could I write. It actually was an idea for a show first, for a streaming series. And I was thinking, like a mystery would be great. And then I remembered the setting. And so that's how it all came together.
Ooh, that's very interesting. And yeah, I could kind of see how it has that um feel of like a prestige miniseries in a way, because it does have all these like really interesting characters who are just as compelling as the main character, and they all have these like hidden depths. And I'm wondering, like, what was the transition like from writing for the screen to writing a novel?
Well, I always wanted to write a novel, but in my early days, I could never finish a novel. And I think part of the reason was because I didn't have the discipline, whereas a screenplay for a film is much shorter. There's only about 100 pages, 100 to 120 pages, give or take. And there's a lot of white space. So it's a lot easier, it's less time consuming to write a screenplay. And so I switched over to that. But along the way, I learned many tools on crafting a story, outlining a story, character arcs, what goes into the acts of a screenplay. There's usually 3-act structure. Television is different, but it gave me a lot of tools that helped me to go back to writing prose and actually finishing a novel. So I think, writing screenplays definitely helped inform me, or teach me some tools. So there are definitely differences. Obviously, when you're writing a screenplay, you're the writer and you're just the writer, but there's so many other people involved, and you're just one piece. Whereas when you're writing a novel, you have to wear many hats. You're the director, you're the cinematographer, you're the costume designer, you're the casting director. You do all of that, and so there's a lot more involved, and it's much more torturous to write a novel, I would say. But at the end of the day, it's also much more fulfilling and liberating, because you can also be very original in your ideas. Whereas in screenwriting, a lot of times you're working off of someone else's intellectual property, like you're adapting a book, or you're, doing a remake, or you're working off of a producer's idea or a news article or something like that.
Did you find that also like your day-to-day writing process was different? Like, because it occurs to me, maybe like I don't have the experience in that area, but that is writing a screenplay like more structured too? Like, does a novel have more like free space to move around in? Or
Yeah, definitely a novel has a lot more freedom in the way it's structured, or where you can go, or how many characters whose heads you're in. So it feels a lot more, again, liberating, and you're not constricted by budget constraints, or which state has tax credits, or things like that, or, working by committee, where, you kind of have your director has their vision, or the producer has their vision, and the studio has their vision. And, so there's, I feel like there's a lot more leeway in writing a novel to go wherever you want to go.
So where do you see yourself going next? Do you think you'll return to writing fiction? Do you think you'll return to this world from this book?
Yes, I am actually working on the sequel to this book. So I will be revisiting the city of Point Meteor, my fictional town. And you'll see some of the same characters, but you'll also meet some new ones. So I'm working on that, but I also still have a foot in the door in Hollywood. So I do have a number of projects that I am working on in Hollywood, but as to whether they'll get all the way to production, who knows? I have so many unproduced screenplays where I actually was paid to write the screenplay, but there's so many levels that you have to pass, and so many gates you have to get through before it actually goes to production. So we'll see, but knock on wood that you can see one of them at least.
I hope so. Yeah, that gives me one last question, actually, like how film production kind of compares to book production. Like, is there less of that like surprise and turmoil along the way when you make a book, or is it just as dramatic and
Oh no, much less dramatic in writing a book. I would say writing the screenplay itself is much easier, but to get it to the final production, there are so many layers. Again, there's so many hundreds of people that are involved in producing something, whether it's for film or television, and so many people who are involved in making decisions, or it's very collaborative too. So you're working with a number of different people for the final product. And there's so much more money involved in producing something for film or television. I don't think it takes millions of dollars to produce a book. So the book is much more torturous to write. The process is a lot longer, and it's a lot harder. But to get it to the final product doesn't take quite as many people or as much money. So in that sense, it's a bit easier, I would say.
That's so interesting. And, thank you so much for coming to talk about this book. I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait for our listeners to get to read it too. And, when you return to this world, I hope that you'd, consider coming back to the show, because I'm sure that they'll want to hear about the next installment too.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
You're so welcome. Okay, listeners, by the time you're hearing this episode, City Under One Roof will be available at your favorite independent bookstore or library, so please pick it up. I recommend it so full-heartedly. This has been Jenn in conversation with Iris Yamashita, and it is time to close this chapter. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you so much.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.